Thank you guys for joining. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this webinar for NIMAC State Coordinators. My name's Nicole Gaines. I am the NIMAC Project Director, and I'm joined this afternoon by Liz Schaller, who is the NIMAC Manager. And our goal for this afternoon is to get you acquainted with the NIMAC, and if you are a new state coordinator, to get you really well oriented so that you are able to understand what it means to work with the NIMAC and how to work in the online system. I will just make a note that we've seen a lot of change in the last year in terms of state coordinators, so I think we have a lot of new folks on board. So the other thing I wanted to note is that we are going to be archiving this training, and the PowerPoint will also be posted on our website. And if you're interested in having it emailed to you, just let us know. It will be available to you as a resource. There are some other resources that we link out to in this PowerPoint, and so it might be a useful resource for you to have. In terms of questions, Liz is going to be keeping an eye on the chat. If you have questions as we go forward, I will be stopping periodically, and Liz and her portion will also stop periodically to ask for questions. But if there's anything that we're covering that you have questions about, do feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. We really want this to be interactive in terms of getting any questions from you as we go forward with it. So moving along in terms of the structure of today's webinar, there are basically two parts. We're going to start out with the PowerPoint, where we cover some NIMAC basics, a few news items, and then talk a little bit about how to work in the system, different types of NIMAC accounts, and then we'll wrap up with a fairly short demo that just walks you through your NIMAC account. So let's go ahead and get started. I always like to just start out with what is the NIMAC and where did it come from? So basically, the NIMAC was actually created legislatively by IDEA 2004 to serve as the national source file repository for K-12 textbooks and instructional materials. So what we do is we make files available to states for use in producing accessible formats for K-12. We've received over 67,000 files from almost 160 publishers since we have been in operation. We first were in operation in December of 2006, so we've been around for a while now. And all 50 states plus the eligible outlying areas have chosen to work with the NIMAC. So as a state coordinator, another basic question you may have is, well, what does it actually mean to coordinate with the NIMAC? Well, basically, IDEA did not require that states work with the NIMAC to get source files to produce accessible formats. It was optional. But states that do agree to work with us, it's fairly simple and straightforward. They agree that they will require NIMACs from publishers when they acquire new instructional materials so that we'll have files available in the repository. And they agree to abide by the eligibility requirements in IDEA and copyright law in the use of NIMAC files and distribution of materials that are produced from the files. As a state coordinator, the person that's in that role to officially coordinate on behalf of the state, you basically have only two responsibilities, and one of them is quite straightforward. You sign the coordination agreement as the person who is coordinating on behalf of the state, and you are also the person who can log into the NIMAC system to add or remove authorized users as your state needs. So what we find a lot of the time is that state coordinators may only be logging in maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, but it's not a lot of engagement for state coordinators who are not also authorized users. We're going to talk a little bit later about the option for a state coordinator to also have what we call a hybrid account if you are interested in also being an authorized user for your state. But just the basic nuts and bolts are you sign that agreement, you add and remove authorized users as needed, and that's basically it. On the paperwork side, we do not require that coordination agreements be renewed annually or resubmitted. We only require a new agreement when a new state coordinator assumes the role. So some other key definitions for NIMAC that I like to cover in this kind of setting is, since we are legislatively created, we are really sort of unique in terms of projects that the department funds, in that a lot of what we do and how we do it, it's there in the law. And one of those things is the file format that we receive. NIMAS is an acronym that stands for the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard. And what that basically entails is that it is a source file format. And to not get too technical here, it's basically, it differs from a lot of other formats that you may be familiar with, like BRF or EPUB or DAISY, in that it is a format that its exclusive public purpose is to create other formats. So it's basically a set of building blocks to produce Braille or DAISY or EPUB or large print. But NIMAS itself is not intended for distribution directly to students. So one of the things that when we talk later about the users and so forth is that we don't work directly with individual teachers or individual students, because these files don't go directly for use by students in the classroom. And so we tend to have a structure where we have a relatively small number of folks in each state who are working directly with us to access the files. NIMAS is the only file format that we can receive. And the other piece that's really important here when we think about how the NIMAC gets files and timelines is that NIMAS is not a byproduct, if you will, of print or digital book production. It is something that happens separately after the book has been finalized. And why this is important is because it's not something that publishers just already have on hand. So it can take up to 6 weeks or sometimes even more for NIMAS to be produced. And in most cases, publishers themselves, well, actually virtually in the case of all publishers, they don't produce these files themselves because they don't have the expertise in-house to do it. So they actually send a different file format to conversion vendors who specialize in producing digital formats. And then those companies actually are usually the ones who are submitting the files to us. So it's fairly involved in terms of that whole process. And that's just kind of an important piece of the overall picture. In terms of where NIMAS came from, in case you're interested in kind of the big picture of the file format itself, is that the Department of Education actually almost 20 years ago established a national file format technical panel to recommend a standard format for use in producing accessible formats. So this is something that has a long history and was something that the department was doing in order to actually prepare for IDEA 2004. It was that technical panel back in the early 2000s who determined that DAISY would be the best basis for this. So if you are a techie person and you're familiar with DAISY, NIMAS is actually based on the DAISY standard. And Congress accepted that recommendation and did incorporate it as the NIMAS file format when IDEA 2004 rolled around. Another important piece in terms of the NIMAC and our operations is that this is a file format that we ourselves do not have the ability to change. In other words, we don't have the authority as the NIMAC to say, we would really like NIMAS to be a different format. We would like it to be EPUB or a different whatever format. It's a situation that it could only be changed through a legal or regulatory process. And so one of the things that is on our radar going a little further down the line is that when reauthorization happens, we do expect that that there will be a discussion at that point of, do we want to look at the technical specification and make changes at that time. So another thing that's important in terms of the NIMAC is that IDEA defines the type of materials that we can receive. And so there are a few different pieces to the definition that the legislation provides, but basically it is textbooks and related printed core materials that are published primarily for use in K through 12 education. So what this means on the plus side is that we receive a wide range of materials. We receive textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers. We actually have a lot of ancillary materials such as Blackline Masters, but we don't receive all print materials that are used in the classroom. So some important categories that are generally exempt are trade books, unless these are bundled specifically with a curriculum. Textbooks that are published primarily for use in college, we generally do not receive those. Reference books, we generally don't get those. And another category, which as time passes is less and less important, but still occasionally comes up, are materials that were adopted before 2006. So basically, again, we receive a wide range of student-facing materials, but we don't receive everything. And we also are not able to accept teachers' editions of textbooks. One thing that I'll talk a little bit more about later is that we are able now to accept NIMAC for some digital instructional materials. And this is a result of a decision by the department in early 2020, which again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So another thing that's really important in terms of NIMAC operations and the way that we work with states, and again, it gets back to that, the coordination agreement and what it means to coordinate, is that under IDEA 2004, the only mechanism to require NIMAC from the publisher is the adoption contract or purchase agreement for the material. This is really important because what it means is that there was no blanket requirement at all in IDEA for publishers to submit files to the NIMAC. The power was placed 100% in the hands of customers. This is why it's really important, that piece of coordinating, that to ensure that, you know, if you're an adoption state, if you are not an adoption state, that states and districts are asking for NIMAC when they acquire new materials. It's just really, really critical. And as I mentioned before, because there is this period of time that it takes to produce NIMAC, you know, the idea that we want to have here is that if you request it or require it rather in that contract, that those files will already be in the NIMAC when there's an identified need. That's really what our goal is, and that's really when things work best. States and districts have been able ever since July of 2006, or rather, July 2006 was the active date for beginning to request NIMAC. Most states actually took a little bit longer to actually coordinate with the NIMAC, but basically this has been available to states and districts for quite some time now. And I just want to kind of give a quick shout out to the National AIMS Center at CAST. This slide here shows some sample contract language that they provide on their website. And we just encourage you, if this is something that is useful for you or something that you would like to share with others in your state, they have some guidance in this area for you. I also want to just make a quick digression here regarding a service that the NIMAC offers. You know, this is kind of a companion to that, the pitch in terms of it's very important to include the requirement in your contract language. But we also appreciate that if you are an authorized user or an accessible media producer who is working directly with the NIMAC, you may not be able to know, is this exempt material or not? You know, is this a trade book or is it a reader that's bundled with a curriculum? Well, what we've done is we have begun offering, actually as of a couple years ago, a service where we take the guesswork out of this if you are a direct user of the NIMAC. If there is something that you need and the NIMAC doesn't have it, we have what's called the watch list in all of the authorized user and accessible media producer accounts. And all the user has to do is add that ISBN to the watch list. We will automatically research that item. And if it's within scope, we will reach out to the publisher and request it. If it's not within scope, we'll see, we will let you know, and we will also see if we can help you locate other alternatives for accessibility for those materials. So again, we're really happy to provide this service, and I think it's valuable, but the ideal is really to require NIMAC in the contract. As another aside, if this sounds like something like a service that would be useful to you in your day-to-day work, that may indicate that you're a good candidate for being a hybrid user who's also an authorized user in addition to being a state coordinator. So the next thing I want to touch on just briefly is NIMAC eligibility. This is an important aspect of NIMAC and IDEA, and there are basically two criteria. The first is that the student must have an IEP, and the second is that they have to have a qualifying disability. In terms of the qualifying disability, IDEA points to the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled eligibility guidelines for those. And so that is what the NIMAC has incorporated in our agreements that we have with states and users. And as a heads up, if you are fairly new to being a state coordinator, you may have missed the news last year that NLS published new guidelines to align their language with changes to copyright that were made by the Marrakesh Treaty Implementation Act. And if you are interested, we're not really going to cover this in depth this afternoon, but we do have a fairly detailed PowerPoint about this. If you're interested, that's available on our website. You may be interested in downloading it from there. But today I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we were particularly excited about and that are really beneficial for students in terms of the changes to the guidelines. The first one is that the new guidelines have expanded the range of professionals who can be considered competent authority to certify eligibility. And first and foremost is that the category now includes educators and reading specialists and even librarians. So it just is going to, we believe, make it easier for students to be certified as eligible to receive NIMAC source materials. Another important change that happened was that the new guidelines removed the requirement for a medical doctor to certify individuals with reading disabilities. This had been something that was an obstacle for a lot of folks earlier on because the prior language had required basically that the only competent authority to certify reading disability due to organic dysfunction, if that rings a bell, you may remember that language, but it had to be a medical doctor, and that is no longer the case. Anyone who qualifies as competent authority under the new guidelines can certify individuals in any category of disability. So just a couple more updates I wanted to share, and then I'm going to hand it off to Liz to talk a little bit more about working in the system and different types of NIMAC accounts. The first update I wanted to give is I mentioned a little earlier that the NIMAC can now receive some digital instructional materials. This is kind of big news for us. From 2006 up until May of 2020, the interpretation of the department had been that we could only accept files if the source book was a hard copy print book because of the language in the legislation. So they basically had a change in their thinking about that, and we actually can receive materials now if they can be successfully converted into the NIMAC format. And so without getting into a lot of the technical intricacies, I will just note that there are some technical intricacies involved in that. And part of that has to do with there are a lot of digital materials these days that are highly interactive, and interactive materials cannot really be turned into the kind of file format that is NIMAC. We have not received very many digital materials so far, which doesn't really surprise us, again, based on the fact that there are a lot of there are some intricacies with the notice and also with just the disruption that has been the COVID pandemic. So, but we are currently working with an independent researcher. We're really pleased to have this project underway to really dive more deeply into the technical assistance needs, both on the side of states and districts in terms of navigating, you know, when is it appropriate for me to ask for NIMAC versus when should I be asking for a different accessibility alternative or some other type of solution in terms of making digital materials accessible. So there's that piece of it. And then there's also on the other side of it, trying to figure out how to provide adequate guidance to publishers in terms of, you know, when and how should they best accommodate the needs of students. One of the things that was pointed to in the notice of interpretation, but not actually resolved, is that there are cases when well, let me back up for just a second. One of the things that the notice of interpretation includes is an exemption for digital instructional materials that already meet the WCAG 2.0 AA benchmark. And oops, excuse me for just a second here. I'm having a little bit of animal interference. My apologies. I am working from home today, and my feline coworker is being a little bit of a nuisance. So back to the slide. So what I was pointing to here is just that the notice of interpretation, part of the intricacy in terms of what it means for publishers, what it means for customers, is that materials that already meet a certain accessibility benchmark are exempt from NIMAC. And so that's a part of the puzzle, but there's also the additional piece that when materials are exempt from NIMAC because they meet that benchmark, what happens if you still need embossed Braille? And that's another piece of it that we're trying to tease out and think of strategies to ensure that students can get Braille when they need it, even if those materials are exempt from NIMAC. So anyway, we're very excited about the research that's underway. It will be completed by the end of September. And so we look forward to sharing the results of that with you. If you have more information, if you have more questions rather, about just the basics of NIMAC and the notice of interpretation, we do have a frequently asked questions on our website that might be of interest to you. So we invite you to take a look at that. Another news item is that we will soon be promoting a couple of series of trainings that we are going to be offering in May and June of 2022. This is really exciting for us. We have not provided this type of training in the past, but this is in response to some requests that we've received over the years in terms of the need for more training for Duxbury and Braille 2000 users who are creating Braille for students. So we will be sharing the details of that soon, and we're just very excited about that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off now to Liz Schaller, and she's going to talk to you a bit about NIMAC account types and system basics.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, like Nicole said, my name is Liz Schaller. I'm the NIMAC manager, and we may have interacted recently as we were sending out our new coordination agreements to you all over the last year, but it's good to see you all today. I'm going to go over, like Nicole said, kind of the basics of the different NIMAC account types and how you'll work with our system. And then Nicole is going to go in and demonstrate some of those things for you. So next slide, thanks. So first of all, what is a NIMAC authorized user? An authorized user is someone who has been designated by their state coordinator to have full access to the NIMAC repository. This is different from an accessible media producer account, which we'll talk about later. An authorized user can search and download files or assign those files to a registered accessible media producer. Authorized users are individuals who are involved in some way in the production of accessible formats for students with disabilities in their state. Authorized users may directly work in accessible media production, or they may manage work done by others. They're usually from within the state educational structure, such as an IRC or a state school for the blind. And we do have multiple authorized users for some organizations. That is perfectly acceptable. Bookshare can also be designated as an authorized user and is designated by many states. Most states have 5 or fewer authorized users. That is our system default. We automatically supply 5 authorized user slots per state, not including if you are a hybrid state coordinator. But we can add more users for your state if you need that. The second account type is the accessible media producer account. Now, an authorized user may work as an accessible media producer, but for the purposes of the NIMAC, an AMP is an organization or individual that has an AMP account. This limited account allows the user to download only files that are assigned to them for download by an authorized user. And accessible media producers do not have to be designated by a state coordinator. AMPs can be a for-profit or a nonprofit, and they can also work with any state. APH is an example of an accessible media producer that's registered with the NIMAC. Now, we also have, as an option for you all as state coordinators, to have a hybrid state coordinator account. State coordinators might be directly involved in the state's accessible media production workflow, or they may not. The basic state coordinator account has just one primary function, which is adding and deleting those authorized users for the state. For state coordinators who would like to also have the functionality of an authorized user, we can offer a single sign-on to access the features for both account types. In order to upgrade your account to include that authorized user functionality, all you need to do is download the limitation of use agreement and print that document, initial each page, and fill out section 13.0. And then you can email a scan of that completed document back to us. We are excited to say that we can now accept digital signatures on those documents as well, authenticated digital signatures. So you don't necessarily have to print and scan it if you don't want to. You can complete it electronically if you have Adobe digital signatures or DocuSign or some other tool like that to sign the document. Once we get that limitation of use agreement back from you, we'll make that change for you in the system and notify you that you'll have that additional functionality in your account. So the next time that you log in after that change, you'll see that you have both state coordinator and authorized user system functions. And just to reiterate, this hybrid account is a bonus authorized user, so it does not count as one of the 5 authorized user accounts that are available by default to your state. If you are interested in learning more about authorized user accounts, or maybe you're considering becoming a hybrid state coordinator, we do have a training coming up on Wednesday, March 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And I'll pop that registration link in the chat for you all after I'm done speaking. And we would love for you to join us, whether or not you're considering becoming a hybrid state coordinator, just to learn more about authorized users. Okay, so your big job is adding and removing your authorized users. So let's just touch on how you do that. And then, like I said, Nicole is going to demonstrate it for you as well. So when you log into your state's account, all the current authorized user accounts will appear under one of 3 tabs in the system. Each tab represents an account status. There are 3 statuses that represent the stages of the registration process, and these are new, pending, and active. The process of adding a new user is very simple. All that you need to have is the name, email address, and organization name for the new user. And once this is entered into the system and saved, your role in creating that account is done. The rest of that process is handled by the new authorized user and by us. So when the state coordinator goes in and saves the new authorized user information, the system immediately emails that person a registration link. So that account will then show a status of new for the user under your list of authorized user registrations. And that authorized user will complete the registration process in the NIMAC system using that link that's sent to them. Just to note that as a security measure, the link that they receive does expire after 10 days. So if the user does not complete the registration within the time frame, you all can go in and resend that link to them by clicking the resend button next to their name. And we also, the NIMAC, can resend those registration emails to new authorized users as well. When the user does complete the online registration, their account will then show as pending in your account. The automated registration email that they received with that link also has an attachment, which is the NIMAC limitation of use agreement. So the new user will need to print that document, initial each page, fill out that authorized user section, which is section 13.0, and sign that document. And as I mentioned earlier, we can accept digital signatures on these as well, so they can complete them digitally. And they are welcome to mail or email those back to us. Once the online registration is completed and the user has emailed us the completed LUA, we will then activate their account, and their account will then show a status of active in your account. You'll also receive an automated email notification from the system when a new account is activated by the NIMAC. When that account is activated, the system sends the user the login ID and password in 2 separate emails. It's important to note that the authorized users may want to check their spam filter or whitelist the system email address if their email server is not letting those emails through. And that email address is on the screen and will be in this PowerPoint. And just to note that if you do decide to become a hybrid state coordinator, that you are not going to be receiving a second set of login credentials for the NIMAC. That functionality will be part of your your sign-on that you already have. So you would not receive these emails. Okay, so the other functionality is removing authorized user accounts. And this is really important because one way that we ensure digital rights management for the NIMAC is through fingerprinting and watermarking of files at the point of download. So this means that each file has some embedded code that indicates who downloaded the file and when they downloaded it. This information is tied to the individual account holder. For this reason, we ask that users do not share their credentials with others. So authorized user accounts are not transferable. When a user leaves their position or role as an authorized user, please delete that account from the system and create a new account for the new person. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also absolutely no problem with designating more than one authorized user at the same agency. An account in any of the 3 statuses mentioned, new, pending, or active, can be removed by just clicking the red delete button to the right of the account in the system, and that change is effective immediately. Users that have been deleted no longer appear in your state coordinator account. However, you can still access the information on their download activity in your state coordinator reports, and that's something that Nicole is going to show you during the demo portion. All right, and just in case you haven't been before, this is a screenshot of our website, nimac.us, and I'll pop that link in the chat as well. And I don't know if let me check and see if we have had any questions in the chat. And feel free to add them if you haven't already. Okay, it looks like Linda asked, I need to change my email. How do I do this? You can send that to us and we can make that change for you in the system, no problem. I'll put the NIMAC email in the chat as well.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I'm going to launch now into the demo portion of our presentation. And where I'm starting right now is this is the NIMAC.us informational website. And from this website, you can access the login screen. And you can also just bookmark the login screen directly. That's probably going to be the easiest thing for you to do. But so where we're at now is this is the login screen, and I've got a test account username and password ready to roll. And one of the things that I just want to point out is that if you ever forget your login ID, just feel free to get in touch and ask, and we're happy to look it up. I think we're also used to having a lot of different logins for different purposes, and most of the time it's going to be your email address. The NIMAC is different in that your username is not your email address. It's going to be a login ID that was set up for your state back when your state coordinated. And so that's always going to be, it's always going to be a string that ends with .state, NIMAC.admin. And so that's something where if you're not in there a lot of the time, and most folks who are state coordinators, you may not be logged in very often, so you may forget what your login is, and we're always happy to help you with that. We've occasionally had issues where folks have tried to use the forgot password because they forgot their password, and because they had their username as their email address, they weren't able to get that to work. So if you ever just need any kind of help at all with your account, just don't hesitate to reach out. So this is your landing page. If you are a brand new state coordinator and you have not logged in before, this is what you're going to see when you log in. And as Liz had mentioned before, you're going to see your authorized user registrations, and you're going to see the 3 tabs that we see here toward the middle of the screen. And active, again, those are your active users. In this particular case, for this test account, we don't have any active users set up in this test account, but this is where they would show up. And again, pending, these are the folks who have completed the online registration. We're just waiting for their limitation of use agreement to activate them. That's where these folks would show up. And then new, those are going to be the individuals that you have initiated registration for, but they have not yet done the online registration portion. So I'm going to walk through the new authorized user process in just a second. But before I do that, I'd like to kind of point out in the upper right-hand corner a couple of other things that you may want to be acquainted with. And first of all, you will notice that there's actually a search bar. And so you can also do the public search without logging in. You don't have to log in order to search the NIMAC. But if it's handy for you, you always have access to the search from your account. You will not be able to download materials or assign materials to an accessible media producer unless you have that hybrid account type that Liz mentioned earlier, but you always are able to search. Another thing up here in the upper right is there is a user information link, and you can also go here to change your password or to view your information, the contact information associated with your account. In order for us to kind of stay on top of the information, this is not something that the user can edit, but if you need any kind of change made, as Liz just mentioned, just shoot us an email or give us a call, and we're happy to take care of that for you. Another item that Liz had mentioned was the reports functionality, and that is another menu item that's over there toward the right. And these are just optional features in the system. If they are helpful for you, you're welcome to take advantage of them. And there are 2 default report types that are in the system. One of them is for downloads, and the other is for AMP assignments that authorized users in your state have made. So for example, if we go to the authorized user download report, you can basically choose your start date, your end date, and there are some options in terms of how you want that data to be sorted. And as Liz mentioned, the nice thing about the way that the system tracks the data is that these reports will include users who may have moved on to greener pastures and they are no longer active account holders, but their data on their downloads and so forth are still available to you as the state coordinator in the system. When you do an export, it will export in a CSV format, which is a format that can be opened by Excel or another spreadsheet. And the other report type, AMP assignments, this is also where you can choose any of your users and export a CSV as well for those. And so again, if these are helpful, feel free to take advantage of them. If they're not, don't worry about it. If you ever find that you are in the need of a different type of report, just get in touch and we will see if we can get a custom report for you if you have a different type of report need. So now we're going to return back to our landing page, and if you have gone into the system and you've done a search or you've come to do a report and you want to return, you can either click the link that says Authorized User Registration to the left of reports, or you can also just click the logo, the NIMAC logo in the upper left, and that will always just get you back to your landing page. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look here. I'm on my New Users tab, and we see the blue button that says Add a New Authorized User. And so I'm going to give that a click. And as we mentioned earlier, this part is pretty easy. You really, you need just very little information about the new user in order to initiate the registration, and then your part is done. So in this case, I've entered American Printing House for the Blind and my own name and email, and I'm just going to create a new user. And again, I get what I get when that happens is I will get a confirmation, but I will also just see the information that I just entered in a table format underneath the new authorized user. So I can see right away that the creation of the account has been successful. It's always a good idea to just take a quick look at the email address that you've entered, just to make sure that there were no typos in the email address or in anything else. If there is, it's no problem. Just click the delete and start over again. But basically, again, so what has happened when that was submitted is that I actually just received an email with a link for me to register for my new authorized user account. So aside from you receiving an email when this account is activated, you will not necessarily have to have any further involvement in this process. One thing I do want to point out, though, is, like, as we talked about before, that registration link that was created just now will expire in 10 days. So you do see under actions, you do see an option here to resend the email. And that's what that means. If you have created a new account and that person happened to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks and hey, they missed it, you can log into your account and click that button and they'll get the registration email again and can complete that registration. So the other thing that we had talked about is in terms of deleting. Deleting is very, very simple, and it can be done for a user at any of the statuses. Again, we don't actually have an active user or a pending user, but it's the same. It works the same way for any type of user. And so I'm actually going to get rid of the account that I just created. And all that happens is I get a quick pop-up that asks me for confirmation, and then I click delete and it's done. So again, if you have someone who's an authorized user and they've left their organization or left their role, it's really easy to get rid of that account, super quick. And then they're gone. And the other thing that I just want to point out is that it does keep track of the number of users that you have registered. And if you ever find that it says that you have 5 authorized users and you have no other available users to add, but you need to add someone, just let us know, and we can get Overdrive to add additional user slots for you. It's really no problem at all. So are there any questions about the process of adding or removing users? Any questions about that part? Okay. All right. Well, the last thing that I just wanted to note is that, again, you can do the search. I'm just going to do a quick search to show you what happens if you haven't been in the NIMAC and searched before. You can search by ISBN, by title, by author, and I'm just going to do a search here for middle school math, and I've put it in quotation marks so it'll search that exact phrase. And once you get to your results, you can further refine your results by applying filters, and you can also export your search results using the export button that's over here to the right. What you will notice again is that, if you are not that hybrid user, you will not see any options over here to download or assign the file. If you are interested in doing that, you would just need to get a hybrid account set up. And again, if I'm done with my searching and want to go back to my landing page, I can just click on the logo and I'm back. And that's basically it. So any questions about anything that we have covered this afternoon, or any other NIMAC related topic that you want to ask about? The floor is open.
Linda put a question in the chat. She asks, why isn't information for EI or ECSE included in the system? So I guess
that's early intervention, early childhood special education. Just wondering why preschool level materials aren't a part of this system.
That's actually a very good question. And the reason for that is that the definition that is provided under IDEA is materials published primarily for use in elementary and secondary education. And so in the case of most states and districts, they do not include preschool as a part of elementary education. So we actually do have a small number of pre-kindergarten materials that are in the NIMAC, but that's because it just happened that that particular entity does include, in their definition of elementary and secondary education, they do include preschool, but in most cases it's considered a separate thing. But thank you for that question.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, well, if that is it, we have wrapped up a little bit before time, so I'm pleased to give you guys a few minutes back to your afternoon. But again, I just always want to encourage folks, if you are, again, if you're interested in the PowerPoint, we're happy to send that and it will be posted on our website. And if we can ever be of assistance, please feel free to reach out. So thanks again and have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you all. I also did include our exit survey link in the chat. We would appreciate it if you could it'll just take 1 minute to complete. That'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Liz, for remembering that. Yes, our independent evaluator always wants us to get input, so we really appreciate you taking a minute to just provide your input on that. So thank you.
Crystal did ask a question in the chat. Is there any data on the time it takes to get NIMAS files upon request from publishers?
Is this asking about like how
long it takes to get a file when we have to request it from a publisher?
Oh, okay. Yeah, if we're having to request, there's not a lot of, part of what is tricky about this is that sometimes when we are requesting materials, they may already be in the hopper and we're just asking them to expedite. Sometimes it's material that they did not have in the hopper. And it really varies wildly. There are some publishers that they will go ahead and they will put it in the hopper right away. We might get that file in 1 to 2 weeks. There are other publishers who may say, we have to put this all the way through our contracts department to get approval to even produce the NIMAS file if it wasn't in a contract, and so it can get really, really drawn out. So there's not really any hard and fast rule in terms of how long that will take. It really depends a lot on the publisher, which again, it kind of gets back to just that topic of, if at all possible, we really want it to be included in the contract so that we don't have to ask for it after the fact, because we can't guarantee, once we get that request, we know that there's an identified need, and probably that kid needs that material pretty soon, if not today. And so, so that can be an obstacle if it's something that, it's going to take us 6 weeks to get that file.